Hello, you're listening to Everyday Encouragement, Timeless Truths for Today, a weekly podcast designed to bring you snippets of encouragement to help you as you go about your day. I'm Jenny Guy, your host. If you're going through a wilderness period in your life, then you may feel like you're out of sight and out of mind. Rest assured, God hasn't forgotten you. We'll see that in today's episode. Let's get started. Do you ever feel so alone, so forgotten that you believe no one even remembers you are alive? Chances are, if you feel that way, then you are going through a desert or wilderness period in your life. Chances are even greater that while you are in your desert, you may think you are out of sight and out of mind. I believe that deserts or wilderness periods come to all of us at some point, and when they do, those times are hard. We feel like we're alone because we are alone. We go through wilderness periods by ourselves. Others may try to go with us for part of the journey, but eventually they'll drop by the wayside because it's our desert, not theirs. It's a fact that no one can cross our desert for us. Furthermore, no two deserts are alike. Maybe you've heard the saying, "Your blues ain't like my blues." Well, I think it's accurate to say, your desert ain't like my desert. There are lots of reasons why we may find ourselves in a wilderness. Those reasons range from voluntarily and permanently withdrawing from the world in order to focus on spiritual matters. That's what a group known as the Desert Fathers did in the early days of the church. To intentionally seeking the desert solitude for a brief period, to being thrust into it. Being thrust into the wilderness usually results from a fall. Falls in life happen. Sometimes we see them coming, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we are pushed down by others. Sometimes we fall because of our own mistakes and poor choices. Regardless of how it happens, whenever a fall occurs, it's unsettling, disruptive, and life-changing. And depending on how high up we were when we fell, the fall can be devastating because of the distance to the ground. Regardless of whether we choose to enter the desert voluntarily or are thrust into it, the experience is difficult. I'm in a wilderness period now. Trying to find some encouragement to help me get through it, I turned to someone who is probably the most famous person who ever lived in a desert, Moses. I've wondered what his life could say to me that would help me cross my desert successfully. Sure enough, as I read his story, I found the encouragement I needed. The second half of Moses' life, the part where he freed the Israelites from their Egyptian slavery and led them to the promised land of Canaan, is celebrated and held up as a model for believers to follow. But it's in the first half of his life where I found my encouragement. I'd like to share with you what I learned. Before I do that, however, I want to summarize, very briefly, Moses' life. As a newborn, Moses was found floating in a basket on the Nile River by Pharaoh's daughter. She adopted him and raised him as her son, effectively making him a prince of Egypt, the leading country in the world at that time. When he was an adult, Moses killed an Egyptian overseer that he saw beating a Hebrew slave. To escape being caught and punished for the murder, Moses fled into the desert. After settling in the wilderness, Moses married and tended his father-in-law's sheep. From a burning bush, God spoke to Moses and told him to return to Egypt and free the Hebrew slaves. Obeying God's command, Moses led the Hebrews across the Sinai desert to their promised land of Canaan. Finally, he wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament. From prince to shepherd, from palace to desert, from national acclaim to nomadic nobody. Moses' fall was steep, stunning, and of his own making. Because he was running from the law, Moses wanted to be out of sight and out of mind. The wilderness, with its vast open spaces and barren landscape, was the best place for him in which to disappear. As a shepherd, Moses wandered with his flock all over the desert looking for food for them. The event that launched him into the successful second half of his life is recorded in the 3rd chapter of Exodus, verses 1 through 4. Here they are from the King James Version of the Bible. Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert, and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush, and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. This is the event that encouraged me. Why? I have 2 reasons. First, Moses reinvented himself. True, his new occupation wasn't as glamorous as that of being a prince, but he didn't let disappointment over his circumstances or with himself for having caused those circumstances keep him from developing new skills that helped him survive and thrive in a harsh environment. As his story shows, those new skills were also the ones Moses would need to lead his people to their new land. Seeing how God used Moses' time in the wilderness to train and equip him with the skills he would need for the next phase of his life leads me to believe that I, too, can develop new skills and abilities in this wilderness period that will serve me later. Perhaps I can even reinvent myself as a new and improved Jenny 2.0 for the time when I come out of this desert. Second, and probably most important, it was when Moses was so completely out of sight and out of mind, remember, he was on the backside of the desert, that God sought him out. People had forgotten about Moses, but God hadn't. Moses said yes to God's invitation. And it was this encounter with God that set Moses on the path to the most successful and impactful years of his life. Understanding that God had plans for Moses and that he still wanted Moses to fulfill those plans despite everything that had happened, encourages me to believe that God's plans for me still await my participation in making them happen. I believe the same can be for you also. If you are in a desert, if you are going through a wilderness period now, then I want to encourage you to be on the lookout for an encounter with God. It may not be something as dramatic as a burning bush that gets your attention, but if you are open to meeting God and remain watchful for the opportunity to do so, then He will surely meet you. You may be out of sight, and others may have forgotten all about you, but God hasn't. And He's waiting to talk with you about the next phase of your life. I hope you heard something today that has encouraged you and possibly given you something new to think about that will motivate or inspire you. If you would like a PDF copy of the show notes for this episode of Everyday Encouragement, Timeless Truths for Today, visit my website at jguypublisher.com. New episodes are published each week on Wednesday. I hope you'll join me for another installment of Everyday Encouragement, Timeless Truths for Today. Well, that's it for now. Until next time, be encouraged.